I've put together some of the best tips to keep your brand new style engine running a lot longer. A lot of people are coming from older generation engines, naturally aspirated drivetrains that maybe are port fuel injection, lower compression ratios, and weren't so susceptible to failures. Today's engines are highly complex, direct injection, turbocharging. We've got CVTs, timing belts, all kinds of extra filtration to keep the emissions out of the air. These engines run harder, stronger, and more efficient, and therefore their tolerances for failure are much tighter. So if you fail to do the right maintenance or treat the vehicle properly, you're guaranteed to see early failures on these brand new style engines. I'm going to walk down through some of the top tips and some of the best driving behaviors and treatment that you can deliver for your brand new engine so you can hopefully get as much life out of it as many of the older cars. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
The first tip I'm going to offer up to make your engine last a lot longer, and this goes for any types of engines. Where do you look right in here? And you're going to fill up your vehicle with gas and of course remove slowly. There's all of the typical information, but you'll notice right there, this one here shows 91 octane rating. That's extremely important. If you don't provide the correct octane to your vehicle, you're likely going to start down the train of detonation, knocking, pinging, pre-ignition conditions where unfortunately the engines don't like that. If the engines themselves don't have the octane rating and the resistance to pinging and knocking, then it's basically like taking a ball-peen hammer on the top of your pistons, and eventually with time that starts breaking, chipping away tops of the piston crowns, breaking rings, potentially scoring cylinder walls, and that ultimately leads to, in some cases, worst case, catastrophic engine failures, and at the very least, some excessive oil consumption and poor drivability. So the bottom line is, one of the key important factors you have to think about is you don't necessarily need the highest octane if you're running a vehicle that doesn't call for it, but you must maintain at least the minimum level of octane in your vehicle when you fuel it up each and every time. As well, it never hurts once in a while to run a tank full of premium fuel, even if it's regular fuel. You don't necessarily need to do that every time. A lot of people claim that it's money wasted, and that may be in fact true to a point, but it never hurts to have a higher level of octane. That's its resistance to detonation and therefore keeps the inside of your engine healthy. As well, on top of that, when you have lower grade of octane and you tend to drive under heavy load, for example, low RPM, and you gun it and you floor it with the low RPM and you're not letting the engine rev out, that too, you ever hear that where you get that tick, 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 ting, 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 you get a little bit of that pinging? That's because there's too much load, and of course the engine and the compression just aren't met with the fact that the octane rating isn't high enough. You start to get that knocking and pinging noise. Now, some of that can be cam timing, some of that certainly is octane, but also driving your car with a condition of hard load at very low RPM is definitely not doing it any good. So ultimately, the second tip is driving it appropriately, bringing your vehicle up to proper operating temperature. And once it's at that temperature, essentially when you start your car up in the morning, it'll rev up and you'll hear it. And normally it might idle, say at around 1100, 1200 RPM on your tachometer. It'll do that for a minute. After that, you'll notice it'll settle down. That's the best time to set off. Sometimes in the colder weather, it often takes a lot longer to do that, but that's clearly what you want to do. You want to let the engine feel like it's leveled out, settled down, and then it's good to go. And at that time, you always want to make sure that you set off gently. No hard accelerations for a while. Let the vehicle get gently up to its normal operating temperature, and then, and only then, can you start driving it in a more spirited fashion. And again, as I say, continue to make sure that you keep the revs up. So if you're going for a pass, make sure you downshift. If you're driving a manual gearbox, bring the RPMs up and then hit it. Otherwise, if you continually floor it with a low RPM, you're likely to introduce more knocking, more pinging, poorer performance, and that bogging has a negative impact on the rest of the driveline. And trunks always seem like a convenient place to put all your extra junk. Well, let's just open that up for a second, and I want to show you the next thing you don't want to do is have your vehicle loaded up with all kinds of junk like we're looking at right there. You see all of this extra luggage and packages and parcels. That adds weight to the vehicle, and unfortunately all that added weight provides stress to the vehicle in general. Let's close that up. So what you want to do is eliminate as much of that extra baggage as possible, because all that extra weight, of course, it just means the engine's working a little bit harder each and every time. If you go and put an extra 100, 150 pounds of junk in the trunk, that often means like you're hauling around an extra passenger everywhere you go. So that does two things. Number one, of course, it has an impact on the engine. The engine's working harder, but you're also dropping the suspension. You're putting more load on the rear suspension when you don't necessarily need it. Is it designed for it? Yes. Suspension, shocks, springs, coils, you name it, they're designed for that. But you're putting that tension and pressure on the system, and of course, that leads to premature wear. You put that extra weight on there when you hit bumps and dips, you'll often find that car dip down really hard, and that's extra stress on your shocks and struts, and certainly does add to premature wear. But the thing we're talking about is engines, and all that extra weight that you're hauling around, it's no different than if you hauled around a full vehicle full of people. You imagine a lot of times you have a 5-seater and you put 5 people in there, and they say they all weigh 200 pounds each, or a larger group of folks, and next thing you know, you're at 1,000 pounds you're hauling in this vehicle. That's a lot of extra weight. That's definitely a lot of extra work that engine's doing. So eliminate as much of the unnecessary weight from the trunks and the space if you don't need it. Another tip you have to really consider if you're buying a vehicle and you don't plan to use it a whole lot, one thing that is going to hurt an engine for the long term. Now, it doesn't hurt in a week or 2 weeks, maybe even a month. But if you're the type of person that often doesn't use your vehicle, you bought it because you thought you might need one, and then you never use it, and it sits, and maybe you only use it maybe once a month or a couple times a month, and it sits a lot. Or even more specifically, a lot of people buy those specialty cars, you know, exotics or sports cars, summer vehicles, and they spend weeks, months sitting without being used. That's one of the worst things you can do for an engine, is not using it. So avoid infrequent use, avoid not using it. Get out and drive it, start it, run it, and drive it at least 10 to 20 miles every single time you drive it, because not using your vehicle is going to create other problems. The oil settles down, it has lots of time to sit in the sump, and you don't get enough lubrication. That oil eventually starts to make its way out of around the rings. Of course, it does potentially lead to corrosion with fueling and condensation in the engine that can develop. And then, of course, naturally, bearings and problems in the bottom end of the engine can develop as well because of the acids that develop in the oil because of, again, further to that condensation conversation. So what you have is a vehicle that sits too long, literally is not great for it. And when you see vehicles for sale, sometimes you find this 10-year-old vehicle and it only has 30,000 miles on it. Buyer beware. Now, that could be a gem, but you definitely want to go through it and do your checks, change the fluids, because there's a good possibility if it hasn't been running for a long period of time, what you'll start to develop are gasket leaks. Sometimes the transmission won't shift properly afterwards. I've seen this time and time again. People that leave their vehicles sit way too long often develop other issues, drivability issues, but more specifically leaks, and it's a big deal because then it ends up costing you more in the long run. It's almost better to find a moderately used vehicle, maybe with slightly higher miles, especially if you're looking at an older vehicle, to get one that's actually been used somewhat regularly. It's used maybe a couple times minimum a week. Maybe the miles are lower, but they're not down ultra low. I mean, ultimately, having a vehicle and using it regularly is going to be one of the best things you can do for that engine. Another thing that I see so many people do is ignore check engine lights. You're driving along and all of a sudden, bing, you get that little yellow light that has a little picture of an engine. Do not ignore that check engine light. That's telling you something is wrong. Now, it could be something simple. Quite often, people refer to gas caps maybe not screwed on tight. Did you just put a recent load of fuel into your vehicle and all of a sudden now the check engine light? Sometimes there's related issues with building up too much pressure, or you have issues, of course, charcoal canisters, or just in the fuel system. So check maybe your cap on your fuel filler is tight, and that's not an issue. But ultimately, you never want to ignore a check engine light because that often does lead to bigger problems. Quite often, the engine is telling you something. The car is there to tell you that something's out of miss, something's out of tolerance, whether it's an O2 sensor, whether it's a misfire, whether it's something's running too hot or something's not running quite right. Maybe there's a miscalculation or compensation for something. See, that's the problem. The computers end up making other changes within to adapt for those failures. So if there's a sensor that isn't feeding back properly and you decide to ignore it, quite often that can lead to other problems. The computers on board will feed back that information, they'll recalculate, and they'll make adjustments, and that's not always good. They might add extra fuel, or they might lean out an engine, and you could actually end up leading to a catastrophic failure or a chronic deterioration of an engine and its condition, simply because the computer has made adjustments to compensate for a sensor that's gone bad. You never ever want to ignore a check engine light because it could end up costing you thousands of dollars in the long run. Now, another driving behavior you want to ignore more, just a lot like not driving your vehicle, is driving it in short trips. A lot of these vehicles now, they get choked out. A lot of them now, of course, are direct injected. In other words, you have injectors putting the fuel right into the compression chamber. And as well, on top of that, they put a lot more fuel potentially in the engine. You get a lot more carbon buildup in the intake and the backside of the intake valves, and that can lead to other failures. Naturally, short trips also can lead to clogging of catalytic converters, which come out of the exhaust system, and naturally that can also lead to check engine lights, O2 sensors, and all kinds of other failures. But on top of it, turbochargers, they like to gradual warm up. And of course, a lot of engines these days are turbocharged, just like this one is. And turbos also like to be cooled down. So if all you're doing is starting the car, driving 2 miles, hustle back, that's not doing these modern day engines very good, because ultimately direct injection, extra carbon, extra fueling, turbos need warm up time, CVTs don't like it, transmissions don't like it, and generally cars that run lower miles between short trips usually don't last as long. So if you're one of those people that just like to start, run down to 7-Eleven to grab your jug of milk and come back, and you constantly doing these little short trips, just know that that's not doing the car any good. Maybe instead, if you've just got to do that short trip, make a journey out of it. Go grab your milk. Go continue on a drive. Throw another 10 or 15, maybe 20 miles. Just do a little leisurely trip. Maybe go grab a coffee and then head home, because longer trips are often better. It gets the engine up to a proper temperature, and that's ultimately going to do the engine a lot better in the long run. Other things you have to think about. A lot of these modern day vehicles. Now, this is a gas 2-liter turbo 4 by Mercedes, but a lot of these modern day diesel engines, which conversely are going away, Volkswagen, BMW, a lot of them are making them slowly disappear. Of course, due to emissions regulations. That's a big thing. A lot of these modern engines have extra filtration in the exhaust systems. You think of modern day diesels, EGRs, DPFs, and all those systems can plug off. And it's very common for have modern day diesel engines that fail prematurely, or at least their emissions systems start failing prematurely, and it costs you thousands of dollars. Trust me, I know. When our BMW X5 with the 35D started having problems because we drove it way too many short trips. Diesel engines, absolutely. They take a lot longer to heat up, and they seriously need a lot longer drives in between. So short trips, the worst thing you can do for a modern day engine. These modern day engines, you absolutely need to take care of maintenance. Let's take a quick look at this 2-liter turbo 4 by Mercedes-Benz. It's coupled up to an 8-speed automatic transmission, but generally this is a very common layout that you're finding in a lot of modern day vehicles today. First of all, here we have a battery. Look right there, you'll have the battery terminals down in there. You can see a battery, it's tucked in. You got to pull the shrouding in this case. A lot of vehicles these days though, you don't have to. A lot of batteries are exposed, but battery maintenance is very, very important. Now, most batteries don't need maintenance themselves, but if you find them getting weak, or they don't charge as well, or they don't hold their charge, or certainly maybe it's a very slow crank in colder weather, batteries are very important. A lot of these modern day cars with high-tech headlights, of course, all these extra fold-away mirrors and sunroofs and all these electronics built on board, and all these computing power means that you have to have a very strong battery with good tolerances. In other words, if your voltage levels drops too far, all of a sudden it creates problems. You can wind up with check engine lights, service lights, faulty equipment, and that can lead to other problems. Right here you have coolant. This is the overflow for this Mercedes-Benz. You always want to make sure that the coolant is the right level and the right type. Check it out. Every vehicle has their own way to look at it. Right here, it kind of gives you an indication as to how to validate that, but always make sure you have the correct coolant. If you mix colors, that's going to be a problem, but coolant always has to be in there, always topped up. And I would suggest flushing that every once in a while as per the manufacturer's instructions, because this does change its pH levels. You do build up contamination in that fluid, and you wind up with poor cooling performance. Of course, your radiator will love you for that, naturally. Of course, here we go, we have air filters. I just did the air filter in a recent service on this. Some are easier to do than others. Sometimes it's a quick couple of clips. This one was a little more involved. But basically, take your air filter. Nothing's worse than dusting your engine, which means you're getting air and you're getting dirt and particulate on the backside, which ultimately winds up in the engine and leads to catastrophic failure. There's a lot of Porsches that have fallen and succumbed to that issue because too much dirt on the backside of the filter. Always change your air filters as per the manufacturer's instructions. If it's really dirty conditions, absolutely do it even more frequently. Naturally, another one we have to think about are checking all your hoses and fittings. Coolant hoses, as you see right here, we have a radiator. This one here says engine, that's going to the engine. Make sure you do all your hose checks. Make sure everything's tight and it doesn't feel like it's cracked, split, and it's not leaking anywhere. You never want to have leaks, coolant or oil. Not only are they an environmental problem, but they're also a potential issue for the engine. Run too low on coolant, you could overheat. You run too low on oil, you could blow your engine. So it's very important that you keep your engine, oils, fluids, and everything serviced, topped up, and not leaking. Right here's another big one, and I've talked about this lots before. This oil is so critical. Here we have a dipstick. Check that every single week at the bare minimum. Always pull at your dipstick and check to make sure that you've got the adequate amount of oil in there. 100%, make sure you do that regularly. And here, you want to change your oil minimum as per the manufacturer's instructions. I always suggest even go more frequently, because a lot of those instructions that the manual says are based on service plans, which they sell you, and they'll only do the amount of service that the manual says. So ultimately, I say do between 3,000 to 5,000 mile oil change intervals. And ultimately, make sure you've got the right additive, because I spoke about a lot of these modern day direct injected engines, and I'll share that link at the end because it's very important. There's a new additive that is a must requirement to put in vehicles that have direct injected fuel systems. If you don't, there's something called a low speed pre-ignition condition, which can lead to catastrophic engine failures as well. These new direct injected engines are ultra critical. They need high levels of precise maintenance, the proper maintenance, and there's definitely no time to neglect. So you want to take care of all of that servicing, maintenance on time, or even in advance. There's nothing wrong with changing oil more frequently. Oil's cheap, engines are not. And so hopefully that helps you figure out some of the key tips and tricks that I have, including some of the maintenance strategies to make sure your engine runs forever. And as I promised earlier in the video, right there, you're going to want to check out that video, why these engines are failing. And oil is such a critical part of these brand new engines, way more important than it ever used to be. You want to check out that video, as well as that video, further reasons why some of the older cars will literally outlast the new stuff. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. We'll see you all real soon. Bye-bye.